At my own birthday party, my best friend confessed she was pregnant with my boyfriend's child. In a fit of blind rage, I lunged at her, my nail accidentally grazing her skin. It was barely a scratch. But for that sin, Brooks destroyed me. He hired men to wreck my design studio and used his family's influence to tear up every contract I had spent years signing. Fueled by a cold, white-hot hatred, I spent weeks gathering evidence of their affair. I called the tabloids. I was ready to burn their wedding to the ground in front of the whole world. But at the final moment, Brooks' best friend, Everett, stopped me. "Sloan, stop. If you do this, you're just destroying yourself along with them." As my tears finally broke, he pulled me into his arms, whispering promises over and over. "Sloan, I'm not like him. I will protect you forever." I didn't believe him at first. But Everett became a shadow in my life, a constant, comforting presence. When I was sick, he flew back from a business trip overnight just to hold my hair back while I threw up. I have a laundry list of allergies. He kept a leather-bound notebook of every ingredient I couldn't touch. A man who had never stepped foot in a kitchen started learning to cook 5-star meals just to keep me safe. On my 25th birthday, he took me to Iceland. Under the ethereal glow of the northern lights, I finally accepted his 100th confession. For the next 3 years, he showed me that love could actually make a person feel whole again. Until a week before our engagement, I was organizing the library when I found an old phone tucked into the lining of a drawer. I turned it on. In the outbox, there was a single text sent 4 years ago. "Millie, don't worry about the wedding tomorrow. I'll take care of Sloan." My fingers went numb. I stared at the screen for a long time, my brain a static mess of white noise. I took a few deep breaths, waiting for the paralysis in my limbs to fade. Then, my eyes drifted to the Notes app. Everett had a habit. He recorded everything he deemed important. On his current phone, he has notes on my cycle, my allergies, and my favorite obscure coffee roasters. A sickening curiosity took hold of me. What did his old self find important enough to record? Just as I was about to tap the icon, the library door pushed open. "Sloan, do you need a hand with those boxes?" He was leaning against the doorframe, his usual warm smile in place. But when his eyes fell on the phone in my hand, his expression flickered for a fraction of a second. Then he straightened up, his tone casual. "What are you looking at, honey?" I pulled my finger away from the Notes app and turned the screen toward him. My voice was a jagged blade. "What is this? You didn't stop me for my own good. You stopped me for Melanie. The protection you promised me. Was that all a lie too?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but it betrayed me, trembling with the force of my heartbreak. He looked at the text, then at me. After a heavy silence, he lowered his head. "Sloan, I'm sorry." My heart skipped a beat. My nails dug into my palms. Before I could scream at him, he stepped forward, gently taking the phone from my hand and pulling me into a half embrace. He sounded genuinely pained. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to overthink things. I stopped you because I didn't want you to get hurt. You have no idea how unstable Brooks was back then. If you had actually ruined that wedding and made Melanie cry, Brooks would have stopped at nothing to ruin your life. I sent that text to her just to keep her quiet so she wouldn't run to Brooks and escalate things." He sighed, his large hand gently stroking the back of my head. "Sloan, after everything we've been through, do you really trust me so little?" So, that was what he was apologizing for. Not the intent, but the secrecy. The hollow ache in my chest softened slightly, but that text remained like a splinter under my skin. He had called her Millie. Everett's mother once told me that while Everett always had a smile on his face, he was colder than anyone she knew. Very few people earned a nickname from him. Even with me, he didn't call me Sloan Y until we had been together for a year. "Come on. Our engagement party is in a week. Let's not dig up ghosts. I'm taking you out for a massive dinner tonight," he said, smoothing things over with his usual easy grace. I played the part. I went to dinner. I smiled. But in the dead of night, I crept back into the library. My hands shook as I opened the Notes app, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was empty. My stomach dropped. Everett had used that phone for 3 years. Knowing his personality, there was zero chance his notes were blank. He had deleted them. And you only delete things you can't afford to have seen. I didn't sleep for the next 2 nights. My mind was a battlefield. One voice told me I was being paranoid. Maybe he deleted them because they contained sensitive corporate data. But another voice whispered that he was hiding a monstrous secret. By the 3rd day, the lack of sleep triggered a blinding migraine. I had just swallowed a sedative when my phone buzzed. A text from Everett. "Sloan, I'll be home late tonight." Then a second one. "Brooks and Melanie are back in New York. The group is getting together for dinner." I froze. Brooks and Melanie had moved to London shortly after their wedding. Part of it was business, but the other part was obvious. Brooks wanted to get Melanie away from me, especially since she was pregnant at the time. 4 years later, and the happy couple had returned. I typed back. "Send me the address. I'm coming too." He called me immediately, sounding worried. Only after I promised him multiple times that I wouldn't cause a scene did he finally agree. I arrived at the restaurant first. When I pushed open the door to the private room, I found myself face to face with Melanie. She had put on a little weight, draped in diamonds and Cartier. Next to her sat a little boy, about 3 years old, playing quietly with a toy car. She smiled at me. It was that same wide-eyed, innocent look she had used to play me for years. Sloan. It's been a long time. I didn't answer. Suddenly, a familiar scent, expensive cologne and cold air, pressed against my back. Sloan. I jerked away, coming face to face with Brooks' icy expression. He was as stoic as ever, but for a second, I thought his gaze lingered on my face a bit too long. When I looked back at Melanie, her smile had faltered. The tension only eased when Everett arrived. He was a natural socialite, the life of every party. He kept the conversation flowing while Brooks offered the occasional monosyllabic response. As he talked, Everett's hands were busy. He spent the entire meal peeling shrimp and placing them in my bowl. Brooks, on the other hand, ate in silence, only occasionally dropping a piece of broccoli onto his son's plate. I remembered how it used to be. Brooks used to wait on Melanie hand and foot while we were all friends. Back then, as his actual girlfriend, I had never received that level of devotion. A server brought out a new dish. Everett immediately stopped him. "Excuse me, this is the wrong order." The server looked confused. "The ticket says the roast beef salad, sir." "This has sesame seeds on it," Everett said, his voice firm. "I specifically told the host that none of the dishes could have sesame. The boy is highly allergic." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. The server apologized profusely and took the plate away. Brooks glanced at Everett, his expression unreadable. Melanie looked up, curious. "How did you know Toby was allergic to sesame?" Everett smiled easily. "You posted about it on Instagram a while back." He went back to putting food in my bowl, but I couldn't swallow a single bite. For the last 2 years, Everett has been working himself to the bone. He barely had time to sleep. I used to tease him about never liking my posts, and he'd give me a tired smile and say he hadn't even opened the app in days. But he had time to read Melanie's posts carefully enough to memorize her son's allergies. That terrifying suspicion from the library flared up again. And this time, I couldn't shove it down. On the drive home, I was a ghost. Sensing my mood, Everett pulled the car over on a quiet stretch of road. He reached out to touch my hair, but I flinched. He looked genuinely hurt. "What's wrong? Was seeing them too much? I told you it was a bad idea." "How do you remember her Instagram posts from months ago?" I interrupted, my voice raw. "Everett, why did you really stop me 4 years ago? Was it for me, or was it because you've always been in love with Melanie?" He let out a long, heavy sigh. "Sloan." I stiffened. He rarely used my full name like that. "I know what Brooks did to you was traumatic. But I am not him. I am nothing like him." Seeing me quiet down, he leaned over and pulled me into his chest. "Please just trust me. I happened to see that post while I was waiting for a meeting. That's all." His arms were thick and strong. These were the arms that had dragged me out of the abyss 4 years ago. He was the one who held me through every nightmare. I wanted to believe him. I gripped the fabric of his shirt, ready to apologize for being crazy, when a sharp, piercing ringtone shattered the silence of the car. He looked at the caller ID and immediately let go of me. "Hello." "What?" I had never seen Everett look so panicked. "Stay exactly where you are. I'm coming to get you." He slammed the car into gear, the tires screeching as we tore down the road. I grabbed the handle, terrified. "What's happening?" His jaw was set so tight the muscles were bulging. "Brooks and Melanie got into a massive fight. That idiot kicked her out of the car and left her on the side of the highway. She's surrounded by a group of drunks." The words died in my throat. I watched his face, the raw anxiety, the sheer terror. Everett was always the calm one. A year ago, I was eating at a late-night diner with friends when a group of guys started harassing us. It got physical. When Everett arrived, he didn't swing a single punch. He calmly called the police and took us to the ER. When I asked him why he wasn't angry, he just kissed my forehead and said, "Anger solves nothing. Logic does." But now, as he blew through 3 red lights, there wasn't a shred of logic left in him. Melanie was fine. Some good Samaritans had chased the drunks away before we arrived. She was sitting on a park bench, looking lost. Everett threw the car door open and ran to her, completely forgetting I was even in the car. I didn't move. I watched through the windshield as Everett hovered over her. Melanie started sobbing, and after a moment of hesitation, Everett's hand landed on her shoulder, rubbing gently. He brought her back to the car. She sat in the back seat, crying softly. Everett explained to me that Brooks wanted a divorce, that they had been fighting for months. It was almost funny. They had betrayed everyone to be together, and it hadn't even lasted 5 years. The great Brooks Reed was dumping the woman he loved, more than his own soul. But the real joke was on me. Because looking at Everett's face in the rearview mirror, I realized the truth. Everett didn't just care about Melanie. He was head over heels for her. Melanie ended up staying in our guest room. I asked Everett why he didn't just take her to a hotel. She's a woman alone, Sloan. It's not safe. I almost laughed. I travel for work all the time. I stay in hotels across the country by myself, and he has never once suggested it wasn't safe. In the middle of the night, I heard Everett on the balcony. He was on the phone with Brooks, his voice low and furious. They were fighting over her. Everyone said Everett had a heart of gold, but apparently, he only grew claws when it came to Melanie. A dull, familiar ache throbbed in my chest. I rolled over, tears soaking my pillow. I pulled out my phone. There was a message from a data recovery shop I had visited a day ago. The phone you sent in has been processed. We've recovered the deleted files. Sending the backup now. The next morning, I was woken up by the sound of laughter. I walked into the kitchen to find Everett and Melanie cooking together. The devastated woman from last night was gone, replaced by a glowing domestic goddess. She waved at me. Sloan. And I made breakfast. Come try it. The nickname hit me like a physical blow. I stared at her, my nails drawing blood from my palms. Everett, who was usually so sensitive to my every mood, didn't even notice I was upset. I sat down. Melanie handed me a cup of hot tea, but before I could take it, she let go. The cup shattered on the floor, scalding water splashing everywhere. Oh, she cried out, collapsing into a chair and clutching her leg. Everett was on her in a second, grabbing the first aid kit. It's just a minor burn. This ointment will fix it. Then he turned to me, his eyes cold with reproach. Sloan, how could you be so careless? I was stunned. The injustice of it made my voice come out in a raspy whisper. She let go on purpose. Melanie looked down, her voice trembling. It's okay, Everett. I deserve it. I did a terrible thing to her years ago. I should accept whatever she does to me. The innocent victim act. I had seen it 1,000 times. Something inside me finally snapped. Melanie, stop the act. You used these pathetic tricks to steal Brooks, and now that he's done with you, you're moving on to Everett? Is that the plan? Melanie's eyes welled with tears. Enough, Everett roared. I flinched. In 3 years, he had never raised his voice at me. Not once. But for Melanie, he was ready to go to war. Brooks' betrayal was his fault. Why are you taking it out on her? Everett stood up, glaring at me. Sloan, you need to calm down. In this state, how can we even have an engagement party? I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. He was so worked up he didn't even realize he had called her Millie again. Or maybe, in the heat of the moment, his mask had just slipped. I watched him walk away. I'm taking her to the clinic to get this checked properly, he snapped, not even looking back. Melanie picked up her purse. As she passed me, the tears vanished. She leaned in, a triumphant smirk on her face. Sloan, there's one thing you don't know. Everett tried to date me first. Long before Brooks. It was the same look she gave me 4 years ago at my birthday party, right after she whispered, I'm pregnant, and it's Brooks. The door slammed shut. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The recovered files were open. One note stood out. The title was, Everything About Millie. It was a meticulous list. Her favorite brands, how many sugars she liked in her coffee, the places she dreamed of visiting. It was 10 times more detailed than anything he had ever written about me. And at the very bottom, there was a single sentence. If Sloan falls for me, she'll be too distracted to seek revenge on them. Then, Millie can finally be happy. I stared at the words until they blurred. I started laughing, hot tears streaming down my face. I finally had my answer. I forwarded the file to Everett's phone. I didn't say much. Just a few words. Everett, you and Brooks are exactly the same. We're done. I packed a suitcase and walked out the door without looking back. The lock on the front door of the penthouse clicked shut behind me with a dry, hollow snap. I stood in the carpeted hallway for 3 seconds, listening to the silence of the building. In my right hand, the handle of my vintage leather suitcase was cool against my skin. In my left, I held the single key fob to the apartment Everett and I had shared for 2.5 years, the space he had customized to my exact specifications, down to the non-toxic milk paint on the bedroom walls, and the filtered water system designed specifically not to irritate my eczema. Every corner of that apartment had been presented to me as a monument to his devotion. Only the best for my girl, he had said when we signed the lease. You've been through enough chaos, Sloan. Let me build you a sanctuary. A sanctuary built as a holding pen. A gilded cage designed to keep a wounded dog from biting the people who had kicked her. I dropped the key fob onto the marble console table outside the elevator. It made a sharp clatter, sliding across the polished stone until it bumped against a decorative silver tray. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. Once, twice, 3 times. Then the vibration turned into a continuous, frantic hum. I stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for the underground garage, and pulled the phone out. Everett's name was flashing across the screen. Beneath it, a rapid succession of Text notifications began to pile up, pushing the recovered note file out of view. Everett, Sloan pickup. Everett, where are you? What is this? Who gave you this file? Everett, Sloan, call me right now. Don't do anything reckless. That note was from 4 years ago. It doesn't mean what you think it means. Everett, please. Just stay at the apartment. I'm on my way back. I watched the floor numbers count down on the elevator's brass indicator. 14, 12, 9. I didn't feel the blinding rage that had consumed me 4 years ago at my birthday party. Back then, when Melanie had whispered her confession in my ear, my blood had boiled over. I had screamed, I had lunged, I had demanded justice from a world that had no interest in giving it to me. And in return, Brooks had crushed my design studio into dust, blacklisted me from every commercial developer in Manhattan, and watched me drown. This time, the fire didn't burn outward. It burned inward, turning every scrap of naive sentimentality into hard, cold steel. I unlocked my phone, opened my contacts, and dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years. Declan, I said as soon as the line connected. Sloan? Declan Vance, my former business partner, and one of the few people who hadn't abandoned me during the blacklisting, sounded surprised. It's 8 in the morning. Aren't you supposed to be at a bridal fitting? The engagement is off, I said, my voice steady, stripped of all inflection. I need you to pull up the old charter for Vanguard Design. The offshore holding company we registered in Delaware before the shutdown. Is the structure still active? A pause on the other end. Declan was sharp. He didn't waste time asking about my personal life when he heard that tone in my voice. Active and compliant, Declan replied. I've kept the corporate taxes paid out of my personal account, just like you asked. Why? What's happening? I'm taking my life back, I said, stepping out of the elevator into the cool, exhaust-scented air of the garage. I need an office, an encrypted server, and a commercial litigation attorney by noon. Can you do it? Consider it done, Declan said. Where are you staying? A hotel under a corporate name. I'll text you the secure line when I'm settled. I hung up, popped the trunk of my modest Audi, the only asset I had kept entirely in my own name, and threw the suitcase inside. Before I climbed into the driver's seat, I opened Everett's contact card. I didn't block him. Blocking someone is what you do when you are afraid of what they might say, or when you are trying to punish them with silence. Instead, I set his notifications to hide alerts and placed his number into an archive folder. Let him call. Let him leave his voicemails. Every desperate plea would simply be recorded as evidence of how completely he had played himself. At the private urgent care clinic on East 68th Street, Everett Hayes stood in the pristine white corridor, his phone pressed so tightly against his ear that his knuckles had turned the color of chalk. The subscriber you have called is unavailable or has traveled outside the coverage area. He pulled the phone away, his chest heaving under his tailored cashmere sweater. The screen reflected his face, usually so composed, so charmingly relaxed, the envy of every young executive in the venture capital circuit. Right now his eyes were bloodshot, and a muscle in his jaw twitched uncontrollably. On the screen was the screenshot Sloan had sent him. The note. His old note. If Sloan falls for me, she'll be too distracted to seek revenge on them. Then Millie can finally be happy. His fingers trembled as he scrolled through the rest of the recovered text dump. The dates, the timestamps, the logs of every dinner he had researched for Melanie, every favor he had called in to smooth over Brooks' temper tantrums during the early months of their marriage. It was all there. For years of meticulous, obsessive curation, laid bare in high-resolution text. Everett? A soft, hesitant voice broke his trance. He snapped his head up. Melanie was standing in the doorway of the examination room, a white gauze pad taped neatly over the faint redness on her lower calf. She had her designer trench coat draped over her shoulders, her eyes wide, luminous with tears that never seemed to fully spill over. The doctor said it's just a first-degree scald, she said softly, limping slightly as she took 2 steps toward him. A little silver sulfadiazine cream. And it won't even scar. I'm so sorry. I ruined your morning. If Sloan is upset, did you take that phone? Everett interrupted. His voice was completely flat, devoid of its usual melodic warmth. Melanie blinked, startled. What? What phone? Everett stepped toward her, his height suddenly imposing. My old iPhone. The matte black one from 4 years ago. I kept it in the locked compartment of my library desk. Melanie's lips parted in mild offense. Everett, why on earth would I touch your old phone? I've been in London for 3 years. I only set foot in your apartment last night because Brooks threw me out on the street. She reached out to touch his arm, her fingers delicate, practiced in their helplessness. What's wrong? Did something happen with Sloan? Everett looked down at her hand on his sleeve. For 4 years, That exact touch had been the lodestar of his entire existence. When Brooks had announced he was marrying Melanie, Everett had felt like his ribs were being pried apart with a crowbar. He had sat in the front row of their wedding, smiling until his face hurt, while his soul rotted in his chest. And when he saw Sloane gathering evidence to incinerate that wedding, his only instinct had been to shield Melanie from the fallout. "I'll take care of Sloane," he had promised her in that text. And he had. He had inserted himself into Sloane's broken world. He had studied her, mapped her vulnerabilities, learned the exact cadence of her grief, and presented himself as the ultimate antidote. He had planned to keep her occupied for 6 months, maybe a year, until Brooks and Melanie were safely settled in Europe and the statute of limitations on high society scandal had expired. He hadn't planned on Sloane being brilliant. He hadn't planned on her dry, razor-sharp wit, or the way she looked when she was completely absorbed in an architectural draft, her hair pinned up with a pencil. He hadn't planned on the terrifying reality that, somewhere between the second year of cooking her allergy-safe meals and the night under the Icelandic sky, the performance had become his life. "She found the archive," Everett said, his voice barely above a whisper. Melanie's hand froze on his arm. Her innocent expression faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a sharp, calculating flicker in her eyes. "What archive?" she asked cautiously. "Everything, Melanie," Everett spat, pulling his arm away from her touch so violently that she stumbled back against the examination table. "The notes. The texts from before your wedding. The strategy." Melanie's face hardened, the damsel in distress routine dropping away like cheap paint. "So what if she did? She was always paranoid. Look at how she treated you. This morning over a spilled cup of tea. Everett, she was never right for you. She's bitter, she's vindictive, and she's been using you as a rebound from Brooks for 3 years. Everett stared at her. For the first time in 10 years, he heard the sheer, unadulterated venom in Melanie's voice without the filter of his own infatuation. "She wasn't using me," Everett said, his throat tightening. "I was using her." "Then what are you panicking for?" Melanie took a step closer, her voice dropping into a seductive, urgent purr. "Brooks wants a divorce. He's trying to cut me out of the trust fund, and he's threatening to take Toby. You're the only one who can stop him, Everett. You have the leverage on his hedge fund. You promised me you'd always protect me." Everett looked at her, really looked at her. The woman he had ruined his own soul to protect was standing in front of him, and all she could talk about was Brooks' trust fund. His phone buzzed in his palm. It was an automated notification from the concierge desk at his residential tower. "Unit 42B. Guest access revoked for user Sloane K. Vaughn. Key fob returned to front desk." A cold, bottomless terror opened up in Everett's stomach. He turned on his heel and sprinted down the clinic corridor, ignoring Melanie's shouts behind him, running toward a home that was already dead. The suite at the Carlisle was quiet, smelling of polished mahogany and fresh white lilies. Spread across the desk were 3 laptops and a stack of manila folders Declan had couriered over an hour ago. "The Vanguard structure is clean," Declan said over the speakerphone. "When Brooks used his father's connections to pressure your clients 4 years ago, he targeted your primary LLC. He never touched the auxiliary design patents or the commercial trademarks registered under Vanguard. We own the proprietary modular layout systems for luxury hospitality spaces outright." "And the capital?" I asked, highlighting a clause in the financial ledger. "We have $2.4 million in the reserve accounts," Declan replied. "Plus. I received a call 30 minutes ago from Julian Thorne's office." My hand stopped on the paper. "Thorne Development?" "The same," Declan said, a trace of excitement bleeding through his professional veneer. "They just acquired the historic Hudson Yards parcel for the Apex Tower project. They fired their lead interior architecture firm yesterday, rumor has it. The designs were leaked to a competitor. Julian's managing director wants a pitch meeting tomorrow at 10. Tomorrow." I leaned back in the chair. "That gives us less than 24 hours to assemble a comprehensive concept deck for a 60-story luxury commercial build. Can you do it?" I looked down at my hands. For 3 years, Everett had encouraged me to take it easy. Whenever a major project came across my desk, he would gently dissuade me. "Why stress yourself out, honey? You don't need to prove anything to those people. Let me handle the finances. You just design boutique residential spaces when you feel like it." He hadn't been protecting my peace. He had been keeping me small. He had been keeping me dependent, quiet, and out of the public eye so that my name would never cross paths with Brooks, Melanie, or the social circles they inhabited. He had wrapped me in cotton wool to suffocate my ambition. "I'll have the initial schematics ready by midnight," I told Declan. "Book the conference room at your firm for 8 tomorrow morning. We go in fully armed." Sloan. Declan hesitated for a second. Have you checked the social registers? Today? No. The Reed Hayes engagement was supposed to be the centerpiece of the spring social calendar. Everett's mother already had the announcements printed in the Times. Page 6 just ran an exclusive claiming you were hospitalized for exhaustion and that the engagement is temporarily postponed. A dry, bitter laugh escaped my throat. Exhaustion. Of course. Everett is trying to manage the narrative before the board of his venture firm asks questions. Are you going to issue a correction? Not yet, I said, opening a blank CAD workspace on my screen. Let them print. They're fairy tales. The higher they build that pedestal, the harder the fall will be when I pull the foundation out from under them. I hung up, opened the draft files for the Apex Tower, and began to work. For 6 hours, the world ceased to exist. Lines, structural loads, spatial hierarchies, and material palettes flowed from my fingers with an intensity one hadn't felt since my early 20s. The mental fog that had lingered over me for years, the constant low-grade self-doubt Everett had so carefully cultivated, burned away under the relentless focus of creation. At 7 in the evening, a knock sounded at the door of the suite. I didn't move. Who is it? Room service, Ms. Vaughn. Delivery from the front desk. I walked over, peered through the security viewer, and saw a uniformed bellman holding a large, elegant wooden box tied with a silk ribbon, alongside a massive arrangement of white gardenias, my favorite flowers. Or rather, the flowers Everett had decided were my favorite because they were what he bought me after every argument. I opened the door 6 inches, keeping the latch engaged. I didn't order those. A gentleman left them at the concierge desk 20 minutes ago, ma'am, the bellman said politely. He said it was of the utmost urgency that you receive them. Leave the box on the floor outside. Take the flowers down to the lobby and give them to the front desk staff. The bellman looked surprised but nodded professionally. Of course, Ms. Vaughn. I waited until he walked down the hall before undoing the latch, stepping out, and picking up the wooden box. Inside was a handwritten letter on heavy cream stationery, a leather-bound notebook, and a small velvet box containing a 3-carat diamond ring, the ring he was supposed to present to me at the party next week. I opened the notebook. It was a brand new journal. On the first page, in Everett's precise architectural handwriting, was a new list. Everything about Sloan, the real truth. 1. She drinks her tea with half a spoon of clover honey, never sugar. 2. She works best when the room is exactly 68 degrees. 3. She hates gardenias. She only accepted them because she thought I loved them. 4. I fell in love with her on October 14th, in the rain outside her studio long after the plan stopped mattering. 5. I will spend the rest of my life making this right if she lets me. Beneath the list was a letter. 5 pages of raw, frantic prose. He confessed everything. He admitted that the initial approach was calculated, that he had wanted to neutralize me to protect Melanie from Brooke's rage, but that he had lost control of his own heart. He begged for one meeting. 5 minutes. A chance to explain before I threw 4 years away. I read every single word without a tear in my eye. When I reached the end, I walked over to the desk, pulled out a thick black permanent marker, and wrote 2 words across the title page of his new notebook. Too late. I packed the ring, the letter, and the notebook back into the wooden box, addressed it to Everett's corporate office at Hayes Capital Partners, and called the concierge to have it couriered via certified messenger. The glass and steel boardroom on the 50th floor of Thorne Development smelled of expensive espresso and high-stakes tension. Julian Thorne, a man who had built half of modern Manhattan through sheer ruthlessness and impeccable taste, sat at the head of the 40-foot walnut table. Beside him were 5 senior partners, 3 structural engineers, and a battery of corporate lawyers. I stood at the end of the room, my hair pulled back into a severe low bun, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that showed no vulnerability. On the massive projection screens behind me, the 3-dimensional rendering of the Apex Tower's interior pavilion glowed in brilliant detail. You've eliminated 40% of the traditional load-bearing partitions in the central atrium, Julian said, his sharp gray eyes scanning the engineering schematics. That increases the structural cost of the steel core by $12 million. It does, I replied, meeting his gaze without blinking. And it increases the leasable square footage of prime retail and Michelin-tier restaurant space by 28%. At current Hudson Yards commercial rates, that $12 million structural investment pays for itself in 14 months. By year 3, it generates an additional $19 million annually in net revenue. Julian leaned back in his chair, tapping a gold Montblanc pen against the mahogany. Your former firm, Vaughn Design, had a non-compete clause with Reed Holdings. One of the junior partners noted, flipping through a background dossier. There were rumors of litigation 4 years ago. Von Design was dissolved, I said calmly. The intellectual property and patents presented today belong exclusively to Vanguard Holdings, registered independently in Delaware. Reed Holdings has zero legal claim, zero contractual leverage, and zero insight into these schematics. If Brooks Reed tries to interfere, he will be facing a federal tortious interference suit before his lawyers can finish their morning coffee. Julian let out a short, bark-like laugh that startled the entire room. She's not just an architect, gentlemen, Julian said, tossing his pen onto the table. She's a shark who knows how to read an income statement. The contract is yours, Ms. Vaughn. $55 million for the interior architecture and project management of phases 1 and 2. My legal team will have the paperwork ready by 5. I extended my hand. A pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Thorne. As Declan and I walked out of the building into the brisk afternoon air, my business partner looked like he had just won the lottery. $55 million, Declan whispered, checking his watch. Sloan, do you realize what this means? You just secured the largest independent commercial commission in New York this quarter. The Hayes family firm was bidding on the mezzanine financing for this exact project. I know, I said, slipping on my sunglasses. Everett's father has been trying to get into Thorne's inner circle for 5 years. When Julian announces our partnership at the Metropolitan Real Estate Gala on Thursday, Hayes Capital will realize they've been completely locked out. And speaking of the devils, Declan muttered, his eyes darting toward the curb. A black Mercedes Maybach had just pulled up against the red zone. The rear door opened and Brooks Reed stepped out. He hadn't changed. Tall, broad-shouldered, with that same arrogant, aristocratic posture that had once made me feel small and precarious. But under the sharp tailoring of his suit, there was an edge of exhaustion, dark circles under his eyes and a harsh, pinched line around his mouth. Declan, take the files to the car, I said quietly. Sloan, don't talk to him, Declan warned. He's unstable. He's irrelevant, I replied. Wait for me around the corner. Brooks walked toward me, his hands shoved deep into his overcoat pockets. He stopped 5 feet away, his gaze sweeping over me with a strange, intense scrutiny, as if he were trying to find the broken girl who had cried on the floor of her ruined studio 4 years ago. You look different, Brooks said, his voice deep and raspy. I'm Brooks. Say whatever you came to say to my lawyer. I heard about you and Everett, he said, ignoring my dismissal. He canceled the engagement party this morning. Told everyone you had a family emergency in Chicago. I tilted my head, amusement curling the edge of my lips. Did he? Melanie told me everything, Brooks continued, taking a step closer. His expression darkened with a mixture of disgust and bitter triumph. She told me about the note, about how Everett played you from day one just to keep you off our backs. And you came here to gloat? I asked, to remind me that the 2 men I wasted my 20s on were both pathetic cowards. Brooks flinched. The reaction was subtle, but it was there. I didn't come to gloat, he said, looking down at the pavement before forcing his eyes back to mine. I came to tell you that Melanie is a liar. She's been manipulating Everett for 10 years, and she manipulated me into that marriage. Don't rewrite history, Brooks, I said, my voice dropping into a razor-sharp whisper. You hired men to destroy my life's work. You tore up my contracts. Because I put a 2mm scratch on your precious mistress's arm. You chose her. You don't get to pretend you were a victim. She told me she was having a miscarriage because of that scratch. Brooks snarled, the composure cracking on his face. She locked herself in the bathroom with a bottle of pills and staged an entire breakdown. I didn't destroy your studio because I hated you, Sloan. I did it because I was trapped in a nightmare, and I thought I had to protect my unborn child. I stared at him, feeling nothing but a profound, detached pity. And how did that work out for you? I asked. Brooks looked away, his jaw working violently. We're filing for divorce. Toby isn't. He might not even be mine. I caught her on the phone with Everett last week, laughing about how easy it was to keep both of us on a leash. He stepped forward, reaching out a hand as if to touch my shoulder. Sloan, I know I destroyed us. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But Everett is worse than I ever was. He didn't just hurt you in a moment of rage, he calculated every second of the last 4 years. Let me help you ruin him. I have the financial records from Hayes Capital. We can take them both down together. I looked at his outstretched hand, then looked directly into his eyes. You really don't understand, do you, Brooks? He froze. I don't need your help, I said clearly. I don't need your guilt, I don't need your revenge, and I certainly don't need your redemption. You and Everett spent 4 years treating me like a pawn in your little high society tragedy. But the game is over. I stepped around him, not bothering to look back. Keep your divorce quiet, Brooks. I called over my shoulder. You're going to need all your energy to survive what's coming on Thursday. By Wednesday night, Everett Hayes was a man unraveling at the seams. He sat in the dark of his high-rise office at Hayes Capital, the city lights, reflecting off the untouched glass of single malt scotch on his desk. On the center of his desk lay the wooden box he had sent to the Carlisle. The ring was inside. The letter was inside. And scrawled across the first page of his new journal, in thick, permanent black ink that had bled through to the next 3 pages, were the words, "Too late." His office door clicked open. His father, Richard Hayes, the senior managing partner and patriarch of the firm, walked in without knocking. He didn't turn on the lights. He simply tossed a thick stack of legal documents onto the desk, knocking over the scotch glass. The amber liquid pooled across the mahogany, soaking into the edges of Everett's returned letter. Care to explain this? Richard's voice was like gravel under a heavy boot. Everett didn't look up. What is it? Julian Thorne just signed Vanguard Holdings for the Apex Tower project. Richard said, his tone icy with controlled fury. $55 million for interior architecture, with an option for the equity management of the commercial spaces. And do you know who owns Vanguard? Everett's fingers twitched. Sloan. The girl you've been parading around for 3 years, Richard sneered. The girl you told me was docile, content with small residential work, and completely under control. She just locked us out of the largest commercial development in Manhattan this year. Julian Thorne explicitly told our liaison that Hayes Capital would not be considered for the mezzanine debt because of ethical conflicts with the lead architectural firm. Everett slowly raised his head. She got Apex. She didn't just get it, she took it from under our noses, Richard barked, slamming his palm on the desk. And to make matters worse, Brooks Reed's legal team just served us with a subpoena for all communication records between you and Melanie Reed over the last 48 months. What the hell have you been doing, Everett? Have you lost your mind over that little social climber? Everett stood up so violently that his heavy leather chair crashed backward against the floor-to-ceiling glass. Shut up, Everett whispered. Richard stared at his son in genuine shock. In 31 years, Everett had never once raised his voice to his father. He had always been the golden boy, the polished diplomat, the master of corporate discretion. What did you say to me? Richard demanded. I said shut up, Everett snarled, his face contorted in a terrifying mix of grief and fury. You don't care about Sloan. You don't care about Melanie. You only care about the Thorne contract and the Reed family trust. Well, guess what, Dad? It's gone. It's all gone. He grabbed the wooden box from the desk, clutching it to his chest like a lunatic. She's not coming back, Everett choked out, tears finally spilling over his lashes as the full, crushing weight of his reality caved in. She's never coming back to this apartment. She's never going to look at me again. Richard looked at his son with utter contempt. Pull yourself together. The Metropolitan Gala is tomorrow night. The entire city will be there. If you don't show up with that ring on your finger and a smile on your face, this firm will be the laughingstock of Wall Street. Let them laugh. Everett laughed hysterically, tears tracking down his cheeks. Let them laugh until their teeth fall out. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a glittering sea of old money cut crystal and predatory ambition. The annual Metropolitan Real Estate Gala was the undisputed apex of Manhattan's social and financial calendar. Every developer, hedge fund titan and society matron within a 100-mile radius was present, draped in bespoke black tie and millions in heritage jewels. At table 4, near the center of the room, sat the Hayes family. Everett was there, dressed in a Tom Ford tuxedo that hung slightly loose on his frame. He hadn't slept in 4 days. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, but he had been groomed to perfection by his father's PR team. Beside him sat Melanie. She had wormed her way onto his arm at the last minute, claiming she was terrified of Brooks and needed protection from her estranged husband. She wore a blush pink Valentino gown designed to make her look like an innocent maiden, but her eyes were darting across the room, eagerly cataloging every camera and high society columnist. Relaxy, Melanie whispered, leaning close to him, her perfume heavy cloying. Tuberose filling his senses. Brooks won't dare cause a scene here. And once Julian Thorne announces the project, we can introduce ourselves to his inner circle. You're still the best venture capitalist in the room. Everett didn't answer. He stared at his empty champagne flute, his hands shaking beneath the linen tablecloth. At table 2, Brooks Reed sat alone, radiating a cold, lethal hostility that kept everyone within 10 feet of him at bay. He hadn't looked at Melanie once since she entered the room. His eyes were fixed on the double doors at the back of the ballroom. At precisely 8:30, the master of ceremonies took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, the MC's voice boomed over the State-of-the-art sound system. Please welcome the chairman of Thorne Development, Mr. Julian Thorne, to announce the flagship architectural and design partners for the historic Apex Tower. Polite, rhythmic applause rippled through the room. Julian Thorne stepped up to the podium, his silver hair gleaming under the spotlights. He adjusted his glasses and looked out over the crowd with a sharp, triumphant grin. Every great building begins not with steel, but with vision, Julian began. For the Apex Tower, we sought a partner who possesses not only technical mastery, but the courage to redefine the Manhattan skyline. It is my distinct privilege to announce our lead interior architecture firm, Vanguard Holdings, led by its founder and principal architect, Ms. Sloan Vaughn. The double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. The room went dead silent. I walked down the central aisle toward the stage. I wore a custom midnight blue silk velvet gown with an architectural neckline that swept sharply across my collarbone, leaving my shoulders bare. My hair fell in glossy, disciplined waves down my back. Around my neck was a single, flawless sapphire choker, a piece I had purchased myself 3 days ago with the signing advance from Thorne Development. I didn't look like a victim. I didn't look like a woman who had spent the last 3 years in the shadows of 2 cowardly men. I looked like an empress claiming her throne. Beside me walked Declan, looking immaculate in a classic tuxedo, holding the leather-bound project portfolio. As I passed table 4, I felt Everett's gaze hit me like a physical impact. He rose from his chair as if pulled by an invisible string, his face completely bloodless, his lips trembling. "Sloan," he whispered. I didn't turn my head. I didn't spare him a single fraction of a glance. I walked past him as if he were nothing more than an empty chair in an empty room. I stepped onto the stage, took Julian Thorne's outstretched hand, and turned to face the room. The applause started slowly, led by the architectural delegates from London and Tokyo, before swelling into a deafening roar that shook the crystal chandeliers. Cameras flashed in blinding waves. I leaned into the microphone, my voice clear, resonant, and effortlessly calm. 4 years ago, someone told me that ambition was dangerous for a woman in this city. I said, looking out over the crowd, letting my gaze drift casually over Brooks, over Melanie, and finally over Everett. They told me that survival required silence. But architecture is not about surviving the elements. It is about commanding them. I raised my champagne flute toward Julian. To Apex Tower. May it stand as a monument to what happens when you refuse to stay in the dark. The crowd erupted again. Down at table 4, Melanie's face was green with envy. She grabbed Everett's arm, whispering frantically, "Everett, do something. She's humiliating us. Look at the way people are staring." Everett looked down at Melanie's hand on his sleeve. Then slowly, deliberately, he peeled her fingers off his jacket, one by one. "Don't touch me," Everett said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was filled with such raw, venomous loathing that Melanie gasped and recoiled as if she had been slapped. "Everett," she squeaked. "You took everything," Everett whispered, his eyes never leaving the radiant woman on the stage. "You made me a monster, and then you made me a fool." He turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving Melanie alone under the burning glare of 500 pairs of eyes. The fallout from the Metropolitan Gala was swift, brutal, and thoroughly publicized. By Friday morning, the Wall Street Journal had run a front-page feature on Vanguard Holdings' $55 million coup, hailing my firm as the vanguard of a new era in sustainable luxury design. The article briefly mentioned the dissolution of my former studio, noting with dry journalistic irony that the firms that had blacklisted me 4 years ago were now scrambling to submit subcontracting bids to my office. In the corporate world, success is the only language that requires no translation. I sat in my new corner office at Vanguard's temporary headquarters on Madison Avenue, reviewing the material samples for the Apex Tower's private sky lounge. The room was bright, flooded with southern sunlight, smelling of cedarwood, tracing paper, and fresh espresso. Declan knocked and entered, carrying a thick legal brief. "The forensic audit on Reed Holdings just leaked to the press," Declan said, dropping the document onto my coffee table. Brooks wasn't lying about the divorce. His attorneys went scorched earth. I didn't look up from my fabric swatches. What did they find? "Melanie has been systematically draining the Reed Family Auxiliary Trust for 36 months, Declan said, summarizing the bullet points with grim satisfaction. She funneled over $8 million through a series of shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. But that's not the best part. Go on. The money wasn't sitting in offshore accounts. She was using it to short Reed, holding stock ahead of their quarterly earnings reports. And do you know who was executing the trades?" I paused, a swatch of midnight blue mohair in my hand. "Everett." "Not directly," Declan said. "A junior partner at Hayes Capital who happens to be Melanie's second cousin." Everett signed off on the compliance waivers because he thought the accounts belonged to a harmless discretionary fund Melanie had set up for Toby's education. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a slow, quiet breath. She played them both, I said. She used Brooks' wealth and Everett's blind spot to build herself an $8 million golden parachute. And it's completely unraveled, Declan added. Brooks filed for full custody this morning, backed by a court-ordered paternity test that confirmed Toby is his biological child, but proving Melanie to be an unfit parent due to financial fraud. The SEC opened an inquiry into Hayes Capital an hour ago. Everett's father just suspended him from the board indefinitely. There was no joy in hearing the news, no triumphant rush of adrenaline, just the clean clinical satisfaction of watching gravity do its work. When you build a house out of lies, you don't need an enemy to knock it down. You only need time. Has Everett tried to contact the office? I asked. 16 times this morning, Declan replied. His lawyers sent over a formal settlement proposal regarding the non-disclosure agreements from your time living together. He waived all claims, surrendered his equity in your joint property, and signed over the deed to the Hudson Valley farmhouse. Send it back, I said without hesitation. Declan blinked. You're rejecting the deed? That property is worth $3 million. I don't want his guilt money, Declan. I don't want his apologies, his real estate, or his repentance. Tell our legal team to reject any settlement that includes financial compensation from Hayes Capital. We take nothing from them. Not a single cent. Understood, Declan nodded. And what about Brooks? Brooks is a ghost who thinks he can buy his way back into relevance. If his name appears on any visitor log, have security escort him off the premises immediately. Declan smiled, closed the brief, and turned to leave. You have a site inspection at Apex at 2. I'll be ready, I said. The 62nd floor of the Apex Tower was currently an open-air skeleton of raw concrete and structural steel, suspended 800 feet above the Hudson River. The wind-up here was fierce, cold, and clean. It whipped through the girders, carrying the sharp scent of the river and the distant, muted roar of the city below. I wore a white hard hat, a heavy navy wool trench coat, and steel-toed work boots. Beside me, Julian Thorne stood with a set of architectural blueprints unrolled across a makeshift plywood workbench. The structural engineers approved the cantilevered terrace for the observation lounge. Julian shouted over the wind, pointing toward the southern edge of the slab. We can pour the lightweight concrete next Tuesday. Ensure the thermal brakes are installed before the pour, I replied, tracing the perimeter line with my finger. If the steel expands in the summer heat, the glass facade will experience microfractures along the corner joints. Julian looked at me, a rare smile softening his weathered features. You don't miss a thing, do you, Sloan? I can't afford to, I said. Julian checked his watch. I have a meeting with the Port Authority downstairs. Take your time with the measurements. The hoist operator is on standby until 5. After Julian and his team descended in the construction elevator, the floor fell into a strange, atmospheric quiet. The only sound was the howling of the wind through the steel framing and the distant hum of traffic. I walked to the edge of the southern perimeter, where the safety cables were strung between the steel columns. Below me, Manhattan stretched out like a living circuit board of glass, stone, and ambition. For years ago, I had looked at this city and felt like an insect, about to be crushed beneath the heel of powerful men. I had believed that love was a shelter, that protection was a gift, and that my survival depended on the benevolence of someone stronger than me. How foolish I had been. Sloan. A voice called my name from behind the central elevator core. I didn't startle. I didn't flinch. I slowly turned around. Everett was standing 20 feet away, near the concrete stairwell. He wasn't wearing a hard hat. He wore a dark overcoat with the collar turned up against the cold, but he had no gloves, no scarf, and his hair was wildly disheveled by the wind. He looked hollowed out, his cheekbones sharp and skeletal, his eyes sunken into dark, bruised hollows. He looked like a man who had walked through hell and brought the ashes with him. The site is restricted to authorized personnel, Everett, I said, my voice carrying clearly over the gusting wind. You need to leave. He took 2 slow, unsteady steps forward. I told the security guard I was your structural consultant. He let me up. Then he'll be fired by 5. I replied coldly. Say what you came to say and get out. Everett stopped 10 feet away. He looked at me, at the hard hat, the heavy boots, the blueprint folder under my arm. The contrast between the woman who used to curl up on his sofa, terrified of the world, and the architect standing on the edge of an 80-story tower was absolute. You're beautiful, he whispered, his voice cracking with an agony so profound. It sounded almost animal. You were always the most brilliant thing in my life, Sloan. And I was too blind, too cowardly, too sick in my own head to see it. Until I destroyed everything. You didn't destroy everything, Everett, I said, looking him dead in the eye. You only destroyed yourself. I know, he choked out, taking another step closer. The SEC is freezing my personal accounts. My father kicked me out of the firm. Melanie was arrested at JFK 2 hours ago trying to board a flight to Zurich with $4 million in bearer bonds. I didn't react. I know. I don't care about any of it, Everett cried, stepping toward me with his hands outstretched, trembling violently. I don't care about the firm, I don't care about the money, and God knows I never cared about Melanie. I haven't slept in 7 days, Sloan. Every time I close my eyes, I see you finding that phone. I see the look on your face when you realized what I had done. Tears streamed down his hollow cheeks, freezing in the biting wind. I love you, he begged, dropping to his knees right there on the rough, dusty concrete. I fell in love with you 3 years ago. I swear on my life, on whatever soul I have left, the protection stopped being a lie. The cooking, the notes, the trip to Iceland, it was all real. I wanted to marry you. I wanted to spend the rest of my life making you happy. I looked down at him. The great Everett Hayes. The golden boy of Wall Street. The man who had once stood over me with an air of effortless superiority, telling me that anger was useless and that logic was supreme. Here he was kneeling in the dust of my construction site, weeping like a broken child. Do you know why you loved me, Everett? I asked, my voice calm, clinical, and devastatingly gentle. He looked up through his tears, his lips parting. Because you're good. Because you're brilliant. No, I said, shaking my head. You loved me because I was safe. You loved me because I was a wounded, broken thing that you could control. You took a woman who had been shattered by your best friend, and you turned her into a project. You gave me allergy-safe meals and quiet vacations because as long as I was small, as long as I was dependent on you, you never had to face the reality of your own cowardice. Everett flinched, as if I had driven a spike into his sternum. You didn't protect me from Brooks, I continued, stepping toward him until I was looking directly down into his ruined face. You protected your fantasy of Melanie, and when that fantasy died, you tried to keep me as your consolation prize. No. Sloan, please. He sobbed, reaching out to grasp the hem of my coat. I stepped back, letting his fingers grasp empty air. You told me that anger solves nothing, and that logic does, I said softly. So, let's use your logic, Everett. I pointed toward the open edge of the building, toward the vast, indifferent expanse of the city below. Logically, you are a man who betrayed his integrity for a woman who despised you. Logically, you use 4 years of my life as a human shield. And logically, there is no universe, no lifetime, and no version of reality where I will ever look at you with anything other than complete, absolute indifference. Everett's hands fell to the concrete. His head bowed until his forehead touched the cold dust between his knees. A low, keening wail escaped his throat, the sound of a man realizing that the prison he had built for someone else had become his own permanent tomb. Goodbye, Everett, I said. I walked past him toward the construction hoist, pressed the call button, and stepped inside the metal cage. As the hoist began its long, mechanical descent toward the earth, I looked through the wire mesh. Everett was still there, a tiny solitary black speck kneeling in the dust of an unfinished sky, surrounded by 80 stories of empty air. The trial of Melanie Reed became the tabloid spectacle of the decade. Over the course of 3 sensational weeks, Manhattan's civil and criminal courts laid bare the rotting foundation of 2 of the city's most prominent dynasties. Brooks Reed sat on the witness stand for 4 days, his face stony, forced to recount every detail of his marriage, the fraudulent financial transactions, and the systematic embezzlement Melanie had executed under the guise of marital support. The press was merciless. The man who had once used his family's immense power to crush a small design studio was reduced to a public laughingstock, a cuckolded heir whose arrogance had blinded him to the predator in his own bed. Melanie was sentenced to 7 years at the Albion Correctional Facility for grand larceny, securities fraud, and aggravated perjury. On the day she was remanded into custody, a photograph appeared on the front page of the New York Post. It showed Melanie in handcuffs, her makeup stripped away, her designer clothes replaced by a drab prison jumpsuit. The wide-eyed, innocent look that had fooled 2 powerful men for a decade was gone, replaced by a snarling, desperate fury. As the court officers led her away, Brooks didn't stay to watch the verdict. He liquidated his holdings in Reed Capital, resigned from his philanthropic boards, and boarded a private flight to Singapore, disappearing into self-imposed exile. As for Hayes Capital, the firm survived the SEC inquiry, but only after paying a record-breaking $40 million civil penalty. Richard Hayes forced his son to surrender all equity and voting shares in the family trust. Everett was stripped of his licenses, his name was removed from the firm's brass directory on Park Avenue, and he was quietly excised from the social register. Rumors circulated that Everett had moved to a remote, uninhabited property in northern Maine, a small cabin off the grid, where he spent his days in complete isolation, cut off from the financial world, the social circuits, and the city he had once commanded. I didn't read the articles. Whenever Declan brought a newspaper into the office with their names on the front page, I dropped it directly into the recycling bin without opening the cover. They were ghosts. And I had no room for ghosts in a building made of light. 18 months later, the opening gala for the Apex Tower was held on the top 3 floors of the completed skyscraper on a clear, freezing night in October. The building was a masterwork. The 3-story atrium was an ethereal cathedral of structural glass, warm limestone, and floating bronze ribbons that seemed to defy gravity. The leasable spaces were entirely occupied by the world's premier culinary and cultural institutions. Critics from London, Paris, and Milan had called Vanguard's design a revolutionary triumph of human-scale warmth within monumental architectural form. I stood on the cantilevered observation terrace on the 62nd floor, the exact spot where Everett had knelt in the dust 2 years ago. Tonight, the concrete was covered in polished charcoal terrazzo. The perimeter was enclosed in 10-foot-tall panels of low-iron crystal glass that offered an unobstructed, 360-degree view of the glittering expanse of New York. I wore a simple, elegant black crepe slip dress, my hair resting loose against my shoulders. In my hand, I held a glass of sparkling water with a twist of fresh lime. The glass doors behind me slid open with a soft hiss. Julian Thorne walked out onto the terrace, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "You're avoiding your admirers, Sloane," Julian said, leaning against the glass rail beside me. "The mayor's cultural liaison has been trying to corner you for 20 minutes to discuss the Lincoln Center redesign commission." "I needed a minute of quiet," I replied, smiling faintly. Julian looked out over the city, the lights reflecting off his silver hair. "It's a masterpiece, you know. I've built 40 buildings in this town, but this is the first one that feels like it has a pulse." "It has a pulse because it wasn't built to hide anything," I said. "Every structural joint, every load-bearing column is exposed and honest." Julian nodded slowly. He reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out a small, heavy silver envelope. "This came to my office this morning via registered courier from Bangor, Maine," Julian said, extending the envelope toward me. The return address was just a post office box. No name. But I recognized the handwriting from the old Hayes Capital correspondence. I looked at the silver envelope. The handwriting was neat, precise, and instantly recognizable. "To Miss Sloane Vaughn, private and confidential." The wind brushed against my face, cool and clean. "Do you want me to dispose of it?" Julian asked gently. I looked at the envelope in Julian's hand for 2 seconds. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel the bitter, burning ache of betrayal, nor did I feel the hollow satisfaction of vengeance. I felt nothing at all. "No," I said calmly. "Give it here." Julian handed me the envelope. I didn't break the seal. I didn't open the flap to read whatever desperate, poetic, or repentant words Everett had spent the last 2 years composing in his northern exile. Instead, I stepped to the edge of the terrace where the glass panels met at a narrow ventilation seam. I held the silver envelope over the opening, let my fingers uncurl, and released it into the night. The envelope caught the powerful updraft of the skyscraper, tumbling end over end through the cold air, its silver foil catching the light of the stars for a single, brilliant second before it was swallowed by the darkness below. I turned back to Julian, raised my glass, and smiled. "Come on, Julian," I said, stepping toward the warm, golden light of the ballroom. "Let's go talk about Lincoln Center."